London, 1848. The wedding gown wasn't hers. The name written on the altar wasn't hers. And the man waiting at the church would never truly be hers. Amelia Westfield stared at her reflection in the fogged mirror, barely recognizing the woman looking back. The lace veil shrouded her face like a burial cloth. The silk bodice pressed against her ribs until she could hardly breathe. In her trembling hands, a bouquet of white roses, flowers meant for someone else. "Are you ready?" Lady Margaret's voice cut through the cold morning air, sharp as broken glass. "Ready?" Amelia wanted to laugh. No one is ever ready to vanish. But she nodded. Because 12 years earlier, when fever had taken her parents and left her penniless, nameless, and unwanted, it was that same woman who had offered her a roof, food, a place at the table, even if it was always the last seat, always the smallest portion. Gratitude, she had learned, was a debt paid not in words but in sacrifice. "He'll never know," Lady Margaret whispered, adjusting the veil one final time. "You and Cecilia are the same height. Keep your face covered. Stay silent. Just pretend for a few hours. A few hours." As if lying before God and man could be measured in time, not in the weight it leaves on the soul. But Cecilia had fled. The bride promised to Viscount Nathaniel Devereux had vanished in the night with a penniless lieutenant, leaving behind a scandal capable of ruining the entire Westfield name. And Amelia, the poor cousin, the invisible one, was the only solution. "Come," her aunt commanded. "The carriage is waiting." Amelia took a deep breath and looked out the frosted window. London was waking under a pale gray sky, and she knew this would be the last morning of Amelia Westfield. Because the woman stepping into that church would be called Cecilia, and the woman walking out, she no longer knew who that would be. There was something profoundly wrong about marrying a man whose face you had never seen. Amelia tried not to think about it as the carriage rolled through the London streets toward the small church of St. James, where a viscount waited to fulfill an agreement written between families. Nathaniel Devereux. She knew almost nothing about him, only whispers, scraps of conversation overheard in the dark when Cecilia spoke before falling asleep. Heir to an old title, sole son. Took over his estates at 20, a man who marries out of duty, his father's dying wish. They say he's distant, cold as marble. Don't expect smiles from him. Don't expect anything. Amelia never expected anything. She had long stopped believing life owed her dreams. Women like her, without fortune, without beauty, without name, were not meant to dream. But Cecilia had dreamed of everything. And when she realized marriage meant duty, not romance, she had run. "Remember," Lady Margaret said beside her, gloved hands gripping Amelia's tightly enough to bruise. "Do not raise the veil. Speak only when necessary. When he asks your name, you say only one word. Yes. Afterward, there will be adjustments." Adjustments. Such an elegant word for a life built on lies. "And if he finds out?" Amelia asked, her voice small, fragile, as if belonging to someone else. "He won't." The woman's tone was firm, though fear flickered behind her eyes. "He never met Cecilia. Not once. To him, a bride is a bride. One is as good as another. One is as good as another." The words cut deep, sharp as a blade. So that's what she was, replaceable, interchangeable, a shadow wearing white. The carriage stopped. The church loomed ahead, small, discreet, stripped of grandeur. But there was no choice. The ceremony had to happen quickly, quietly, before anyone uncovered the truth. Amelia stepped out, her knees weak beneath layers of silk. The veil blurred her vision like mist. When the doors opened, candlelight spilled over the aisle. The priest waited, and at the far end, a man stood with his back to her, tall, broad-shouldered beneath a black coat, dark hair, still as stone. Nathaniel Devereux, the man who would marry her, the man who would believe she was someone else, the man who could never know the truth. Amelia took one step. then another. Each step felt like sinking deeper into a lie she could never escape. But it was too late for truth, too late for turning back, too late for the woman she used to be. Before we continue this impossible love story, make sure to subscribe for more tales of love, betrayal, and scandal from another time. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you listening from? I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's return to Amelia and Nathaniel. Chapter 1. The Silence and the Absence. The veil was a prison made of silk. Amelia kept her eyes lowered, fingers laced tightly around the bouquet of white roses. Flowers Lady Margaret had chosen for Cecilia. Trembling now in hands that did not belong to her, the chapel was almost empty. Only those required by formality, her uncle, her aunt, a somber lawyer, and an elderly woman in a black shawl whom Amelia assumed to be a relative of the Viscount. Nathaniel Devereux stood beside the priest, motionless as marble. Tall, broad-shouldered beneath his immaculate black coat, he did not turn as she entered. He did not move when she took her place beside him. Only the faint rhythm of his breathing betrayed that he was made of flesh and not stone. The organ played softly, mournful notes filling the silence, echoing the lie that hung beneath Amelia's veil. When the priest asked whether Nathaniel accepted Lady Cecilia Westfield as his lawful wife, he answered with a single word. "I do." His voice was deep and steady, the sound of duty, not devotion. Then it was her turn. Her lips parted once, then closed again. "I do," she whispered finally, trembling, fragile, but enough. The priest smiled. Lady Margaret exhaled with relief, and Nathaniel remained perfectly still, untouched by the moment that bound their fates. Then came the part Amelia dreaded most. "You may kiss the bride." Nathaniel turned slowly. His gloved hands rose toward her veil and stopped halfway. For a heartbeat, his fingers hovered in the air, so close she could feel the warmth of them through the thin silk. But then he withdrew. "That won't be necessary," he murmured, low enough for her alone. And just like that, the moment ended before it began. They signed the register in silence. Nathaniel's signature was sharp and elegant. Amelia's shaky, a poor imitation of Cecilia's hand, practiced in desperation only hours before. When the ink dried, he offered his arm, a gesture more formal than kind. "Come," he said without looking at her, and she followed, out of the church, into the waiting carriage, into a life that was not hers. The door closed behind them with a sound like finality. For the first time, Amelia was alone with the man who was now her husband, a man whose face she had barely seen, whose voice she barely knew, and who looked at her as if she were nothing more than a duty completed. The rain began as soon as they left. Nathaniel sat across from her, not beside her, head leaned back against the dark green velvet seat, eyes on the window as if she weren't there at all. Rain pattered against the roof. Wheels hissed over the wet cobblestone. Neither spoke. Through the pale mist of her veil, Amelia studied him. His face was all sharp lines, square jaw, high cheekbones, lips pressed into an unyielding line. He wasn't handsome in the romantic sense. He was severe, solid. A man who had learned too early how heavy responsibility could be. She remembered the whispers. An only heir since youth. Father dead 3 years. A man who handled everything alone, and now married. Not for love, for duty. "We'll reach Harrogate before nightfall," Nathaniel said suddenly, still watching the rain slide down the glass. "It will be your residence, about 3 hours from London." "Your residence, not ours." "As you wish," Amelia murmured, her voice soft, almost lost to the storm. He turned his head slightly, his gaze falling on her veil. His eyes were gray, cold as the clouds outside. For a moment, she thought he might ask why she kept it lowered, demand to see the face of the woman he'd just married. But instead, his brow furrowed slightly. "You may lift your veil if you wish," he said, indifferent. "We're married now. Formalities are no longer necessary." Her heart pounded painfully. No, not yet. If he saw her, if he realized she was not Cecilia, everything would end. "I'd rather keep it down," she whispered. "The light hurts my head. I suffer from migraines." Nathaniel arched a single brow. For a moment she thought he'd question her, but he merely shrugged. "As you prefer." And the silence swallowed them once more. Amelia exhaled slowly, aware she had only delayed the inevitable. But for how long? To confess? To run? To prepare for a truth that could destroy them both? The chill inside the carriage grew sharper. Not the cold of winter, but the kind born of distance, the kind that no fire could chase away. London faded behind them. Narrow streets gave way to rolling fields, wind-twisted trees, small villages where children chased each other through puddles. Amelia pulled her shawl tighter, though the cold she felt came from within. "Do you have family in London?" Nathaniel asked suddenly, his voice breaking the silence like glass. Family, what a strange word. "I have an aunt and uncle," she said, half truth, half lie. "But we're not close." He nodded, unsurprised. Better that way. Fewer visitors, fewer obligations. Fewer obligations. Was that how he viewed marriage? Another item to tick off a list? Amelia felt something tighten in her chest. A hollow ache, deep and cold, like staring into an empty well. The rain had stopped by the time Harrogate appeared on the horizon. The manor rose between green hills, built of gray stone and silence. Its tall windows caught the colorless sky, reflecting a light that felt neither warm nor welcoming. The carriage rolled through wrought iron gates and followed an avenue lined with ancient oaks. Amelia looked out, gardens trimmed to perfection, fountains frozen mid-song, a greenhouse glinting faintly in the distance. It was magnificent and terrifying, because it was her prison now, a gilded cage built on borrowed vows. The carriage stopped at the grand entrance. Nathaniel stepped out first, not offering his hand. He merely waited as she gathered her skirts and descended on her own, the veil slipping over her eyes. An elderly butler appeared at the door, flanked by two maids who curtsied quickly. "Welcome home, my lord," the butler said. Then, with a precise bow, "And to you, Lady Devereux." Lady Devereux. The name didn't fit. It felt borrowed, tight, foreign, because it was. "Prepare her rooms," Nathaniel said, climbing the steps without a backward glance, "and send up a tray of tea. She must be tired from the journey." His tone was polite, perfectly polite, yet hollow. The way one might speak to a guest, or a stranger. And that was exactly what Amelia was. A stranger wearing another woman's name. Nathaniel disappeared into the house without a word of farewell, leaving her alone in the doorway. The butler motioned to one of the maids, a rosy-cheeked girl with curious eyes. "Please follow me, milady," the girl said softly. Amelia nodded and followed her up the staircase. The corridors were long and silent, lined with portraits of solemn ancestors who seemed to watch her with quiet disapproval. Every footstep echoed on the marble floors. Every closed door whispered of secrets. Finally, they reached a pair of tall oak doors. The maid opened them to reveal a vast bedchamber. Canopy bed, glowing fire, velvet curtains in deep blue. Beautiful, empty, cold. "Welcome home," Amelia thought bitterly. "Welcome to the house where no one knows your name, where you do not exist." Chapter 2. The Unlikely Encounter. Nathaniel Devereux did not believe in destiny. He believed in contracts, in inheritances, in responsibilities one does not choose, only fulfills. Marriage was one of them. His father had made it clear before dying. The alliance with the Westfields would secure adjoining lands, political influence, and financial stability. Nathaniel had signed the agreement at 23, back when he still believed there would be time. Time to meet his bride. Time to build something more than a sealed contract. But 3 years passed in a blur of harvest failures, debts, and endless meetings with estate stewards. And when he finally looked up, the wedding date had arrived. Lady Cecilia Westfield, a name on paper, a face he had never seen, a woman he would marry because he had promised a dying father he would. Nothing more. As he climbed the grand staircase of Harrogate, Nathaniel tried not to think of the butler's look of relief at seeing him return married, or the way his bride, his wife, he corrected himself, had trembled beneath her veil throughout the ceremony. She had seemed frightened, or perhaps merely regretful. Nathaniel didn't blame her. He too felt like a man serving a sentence rather than celebrating a union. At the top of the stairs, he paused before his own door. Across the corridor, he could see hers. Separate rooms, and as it should be, at least until they both adjusted to the reality that they were now irrevocably bound. He entered his chamber, closed the door, and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. Done. It was done. And he felt nothing, no satisfaction, no relief, only the familiar weight of duty completed. He removed his coat and waistcoat, untied the cravat at his throat, and approached the window. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the sky still hung low and heavy. The hills of Harrogate stretched in shades of gray and green as far as the eye could see. This land had been his responsibility since the age of 20. Every tree, every acre, every soul who worked upon it depended on his decisions. And now there was one more person under his care, a wife whose face he had deliberately chosen not to see. Nathaniel knew it was cowardice. He knew he should have lifted the veil in that chapel, should have looked her in the eyes, should have at least attempted to begin this marriage with a semblance of honesty. But he couldn't, because looking at her would make it real. Would mean admitting that this was not merely duty. It was the beginning of a life shared with a stranger. The clock above the mantel struck 6 when a knock came at the door. "Enter," Nathaniel called. The butler appeared, balancing a tray with brandy and biscuits. "My lord, the cook wishes to know if dinner shall be served in the dining room or your quarters." Nathaniel hesitated. The proper thing would be to dine with his wife. To speak. To begin something resembling companionship. But the idea of sitting across from a woman who had kept her veil lowered even through the carriage ride felt absurd. "In our rooms," he said finally. "Both." The butler nodded, though Nathaniel noticed the faint arch of his brow. Newlyweds were expected to dine together, to talk, to at least attempt familiarity. But Nathaniel had no energy to pretend. Not tonight. Maybe tomorrow. Or the next day, when this suffocating sense of reality dulled. He poured himself a glass of brandy and drank slowly, letting the warmth burn its way down his throat. He thought of the woman across the corridor. Was she crying? Regretting? Or simply relieved to be away from him? Nathaniel didn't know. And truthfully, a part of him didn't want to. Because knowing her meant emotional responsibility, not just legal. It meant caring. And he had learned over the past 3 years that caring too much was dangerous. That opening one's heart was an invitation to loss. It was safer to keep distance. To treat this for what it was, an arrangement. 2 people under the same roof, fulfilling expectations, maintaining appearances, nothing more except something was off, her voice during the vows, trembling, hesitant. The way she'd recoiled when he almost touched the veil, as if afraid. But of what? Of him? Of marriage itself? Or something else entirely? Nathaniel pushed the thought away and opened the drawer of his desk. Letters awaited replies, reports from stewards, ledgers to review. There was always work. Work was easier than silence. He dipped his pen but found himself unable to focus. His mind kept returning to the corridor, to the closed door, to the woman who now bore his name, a woman he had deliberately chosen not to know. Why? Why had he turned away at the altar? Why hadn't he lifted the veil? He had no answer. Or perhaps he did, but refused to admit it. Because seeing her face would make the illusion impossible. Would make it human. Night fell slowly over Harrogate. Nathaniel heard movement in the hallway, servants carrying trays, preparing rooms for rest. He heard her door open and close. Then silence again. Heavy. Endless. He rose, walked to his own door, and opened it slightly. Across the corridor, a thin strip of light glowed beneath her door. She was awake, probably just as restless as he was. Would it be appropriate to knock? To ask if she needed anything? To attempt conversation? But what would he even say? "I'm sorry I never looked at you. I'm sorry I've turned our marriage into duty. I'm sorry I'm not the man you hoped for." The words felt hollow before they even reached his lips. He closed the door again and returned to his desk. Tried once more to read the reports, but every line blurred into thoughts of her, the way her hands had trembled around the bouquet, small and delicate. Her voice soft as Chapter 3. The Moral Trial. Amelia woke without knowing where she was. For a moment, confusion swallowed everything. The ceiling was too high, the curtains too heavy, the bed far too soft. Then memory struck, cold and merciless. London. The church. The veil, Nathaniel, the marriage. The lie. She sat upright, heart racing, and looked around. The room was vast, perfectly arranged, and utterly lifeless. No trace of warmth, no sign of anyone who truly lived there. It felt like a stage prepared for a play she did not know how to perform. The pale morning light slipped timidly between the curtains, as if apologizing for intruding. Amelia drew a shawl around her shoulders and rose. Her bare feet sank into the thick carpet. Everything around her was too fine, too polished, too foreign. And she felt like an intruder in a world that did not belong to her. A gentle knock startled her. Before she could answer, the door opened and the same maid from the day before, the rosy-cheeked girl, entered with a silver tray. "Good morning, milady," the girl said with a quick curtsy. "I brought breakfast. The butler said you might prefer to have it here." Amelia nodded, relieved. She wouldn't have to face Nathaniel at the table. "Not yet, thank you," she murmured. The maid placed the tray on a small table by the window, then hesitated, as if there was more she wished to say. "His lordship left early to inspect the grounds," she said at last, choosing her words carefully. "He does so every morning. Returns around noon, so he was gone." Amelia wasn't sure whether she felt relief or disappointment. Perhaps both. "I see," she said softly, taking a seat. The maid began to tidy the bed, but Amelia could feel her curiosity like a weight in the room. She knew what the girl must be thinking. Why did the new marriage seem so cold? Why were the chambers separate? Rumors would soon find their way through the servants' hall. Amelia would have to be careful. Every word, every glance, every silence could be twisted into scandal. "What is your name?" Amelia asked suddenly, trying to break the tension. The maid blinked, surprised. "Mary, milady." "Mary," Amelia repeated gently. "How long have you worked here?" 3 years, milady, since his lordship took over the estate." A pause. "He's a good master, fair, but reserved. Very reserved. Reserved. Such a kind word for what he truly was. Distant. Cold. A man who married out of duty. And nothing more." Amelia sipped her tea slowly, the warmth sliding down her throat but never quite reaching the chill within her. When Mary had finished, she asked if her lady required anything else. Amelia shook her head. When the door closed again, silence settled like a shroud. Amelia walked to the window and drew back the curtains. The view was breathtaking. Manicured gardens, stone fountains, and beyond them, open fields stretching to the horizon. Beautiful. Perfect. Unreal. As if she had stepped into a painting and could not find her way out. Below, gardeners moved through the lawns, trimming rose bushes, shaping hedges. Life continued, while she remained trapped in this room, unseen, unnecessary. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass. "What have I done?" she whispered, but the answer came quickly, cruelly clear. She had taken someone else's place because she'd never truly had one of her own. The morning dragged on beneath the heavy silence. Amelia tried to read a worn volume of poetry she found on the shelf. Wordsworth, but the words refused to stay still. She tried to rest, but her mind wouldn't quiet. She tried to breathe, but even the air here felt rationed. Everything in this house reminded her she didn't belong, that she was living a stolen life. That discovery was only a matter of time. She thought of Cecilia. Where was her cousin now? Laughing beside her soldier with no title? Regretting or blissfully indifferent to the ruin left behind? Anger rose, hot and sharp. Anger at Cecilia for running. At Lady Margaret for orchestrating this deception. At herself for always yielding, always obeying, always disappearing so others could shine. Sudden, she heard footsteps in the corridor. Heavy, measured. Nathaniel. Her breath caught. She waited. For the knock, for his voice, for something. For him to demand to see her face. But the footsteps passed her door and faded away. He hadn't come. He hadn't even asked. Amelia didn't know whether to be relieved or wounded, because being ignored hurt more than being confronted. To be invisible was worse than to be rejected. At least rejection acknowledged. Existence. Indifference erased you completely, and Amelia had spent her entire life being erased. She had thought marriage, even a false one, might change that. But it hadn't. Afternoon painted the sky in shades of rose and gold. Amelia stayed where she was, within those walls that seemed to close in inch by inch. When Mary returned with dinner, a tray with soup, bread and fruit, Amelia asked, trying to sound casual. Does his lordship dine in his chambers as well? Mary hesitated, uncomfortable. Yes, milady. His lordship prefers it that way. He says there is much work to be done. So that was it. He avoided her, not by circumstance, but by choice. The marriage that had barely begun was already an elaborate farce. Two strangers sharing a roof, separated by hallways and silences louder than any words. Amelia should have felt relieved. The longer he ignored her, the longer she could prepare, plan, decide. But relief was nowhere to be found. Only loneliness, the kind that pressed against her ribs until breathing hurt. Night descended. Amelia changed into a simple nightgown and slipped into the massive bed. She stared at the ceiling, counting the flickering shadows cast by the firelight. She tried not to think. But thoughts came anyway. What if Nathaniel discovered the truth? What if he sent her away? What if he exposed her? Or worse, what if he never cared enough to find out? That last thought was the cruelest. To be found out would be terrible. But to be forgotten forever, that was unbearable. Because it would mean she truly didn't matter. That her existence, false or real, made no difference at all. She turned on her side, clutching the pillow. She did not cry. She had cried enough as a child, when her parents died, when the world forgot her. She had learned since then that tears changed nothing. They only made you tired. In the corridor, footsteps again. Nathaniel returning to his own chamber. Amelia held her breath. The steps slowed, paused. For one fragile moment, she thought he was standing outside her door. Her pulse quickened. Would he knock? Speak? But then, the footsteps moved on. His door opened, closed. Silence reclaimed the house. Amelia lay back down, pulling the blankets to her chin. He doesn't even know who I am, she whispered to the dark. And I don't know who he is. How could something like this ever work? The answer came, cold and certain. It couldn't. It never would. It was only a matter of time before everything collapsed, before truth broke through and she paid the price for daring to occupy another woman's place. Until then, she would have to remain Cecilia. Keep lying. Keep disappearing. The fire crackled softly. Outside, an owl cried into the darkness, and Amelia, a viscountess by stolen name and fractured heart, finally drifted to sleep, dreaming of a place where she wouldn't need to pretend, where she could simply be seen, known, accepted. But deep down, she knew that such a place did not exist. Not for an orphaned girl with no dowry, no title, no worth. Not for women who lived in the shadows of others. And certainly not for a wife who didn't even know her own name at the altar. Still, she told herself, if she was careful, patient, invisible enough, she might survive. And survival was the only thing Amelia Westfield had ever truly known. Chapter 4. Unwilling Trust. Nathaniel had not meant to find her there. It was just after 6. He had come down to the library for the ledger he'd left the night before, counting on a house still asleep. But when he opened the door, she was standing at the shelves, barefoot, wrapped in a shawl over a nightgown, brown hair loose in soft waves down her back. No veil, he stopped. She hadn't seen him yet. Her head was tilted, reading titles under her breath. For the first time, he could see her, truly see her. She was not what he had been told to expect. Cecilia Westfield was said to be the sort of beauty that turned heads, tall, fair, striking. The woman before him was none of that. Brown hair, middling height, a face, delicate. Breakable, almost, the way porcelain looks breakable before a hand ever touches it. He took a step back, intending to leave before she noticed. A floorboard creaked. She turned quickly, eyes wide, deep brown, almost gold in the candlelight cupped in her hand. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then she set the candle down and drew the shawl up, as if she could still hide the face he had already seen. Too late. Nathaniel felt his brow draw together, confusion pricking like cold. "Forgive me," she said, voice unsteady. "I didn't know. I thought everyone would still be asleep. I only wanted a book." Her voice was too soft, too careful. Not the easy confidence of London ballrooms, not even the practiced brightness he'd grown used to from society's daughters. There was something else. The way she held herself a fraction too small, as if bracing for reprimand, as if she did not have the right to be where she was. Nathaniel made himself ease his expression. "It is your home now," he said, keeping his tone even. "You may use the library whenever you wish." She nodded but did not move, the shawl still drawn up, her shoulders taut. He entered, closing the door behind him, and crossed to the desk where he had left the account book. He pretended to search, giving her time to recover. Or to leave if she preferred. She didn't. After a moment, he heard her step cautiously back toward the shelves. "Are you looking for something in particular?" he asked without turning, leafing through pages he was not reading. Silence. Then, poetry. Or novels, if there are any. He glanced up. She was turned sideways now, the shawl still half covering her hair, and he could see the gentle curve of her cheek, the small nose, the mouth pressed into a nervous line. "Third case on the left," he said. "Shakespeare, Milton, Shelley, and a few novels that belonged to my mother." She turned slightly, surprised. "Your mother liked novels?" "Very much." He wasn't sure why he kept speaking. "She said they were the only way to travel without leaving home." A tiny smile touched her mouth. So brief he might have missed it. He did not. She moved to the indicated shelf and let her fingertips trail along the spines with an almost reverent slowness, as if each volume were a thing of worth. Nathaniel watched, curious against his will. Ladies of rank often feigned interest in books because it sounded agreeable. This looked nothing like pretense. "Emma," she read softly, drawing out a volume. "Jane Austen. I read it some years ago. Did you like it?" The question surprised him by existing. She hesitated, as though weighing whether honesty would cost her. "I did, though Emma can be exasperating at times." Nathaniel almost smiled. Almost. Agreed. Which is what makes her human. She looked over then. Not fully, only enough for their eyes to meet a second. In that second, he saw what he had not expected to see. Intelligence. And solitude. The old, deep kind that learns not to ask anything of anyone. She lowered her gaze again and drew the book to her chest. "Thank you, I'll take it upstairs." "You needn't," he heard himself say. She paused, puzzled. "You can read here, if you prefer." The light is better. And the fire. Why was he saying this? Why did it matter where she read? Yet the words were out, and rescinding them felt like closing a door he had not meant to slam. She looked at the armchair by the hearth, then back at him, uncertain. I don't wish to be in the way. You are not. He had nothing urgent to do. He knew it, and he suspected so did she. But the way she looked at the chair, almost hungrily, said enough. As if reading by a lit fire were a luxury not readily given. That made little sense. A baron's daughter would have known comfort as a language. He did not ask. But the question planted itself and stayed. She nodded at last and crossed to the chair, sitting on the edge of it, as though she were not entirely sure she was allowed to occupy its whole softness. She opened the book and began to read. Nathaniel took the desk and made a show of organizing papers. His eyes returned to her despite him. The care with which she turned pages. The faint, unguarded curve of her mouth when a line pleased her. The way, after a while, she tucked her legs beneath herself, a posture no visiting lady would dare in company. She had forgotten he was there, or perhaps she remembered and, for once, did not mind. He discovered, with a start, that he did not mind either. In truth, there was something restful in that shared quiet. No performance required, no attention demanded. Two people existing in the same room, each within separate weather, the air between them neither cold nor charged, but simply still. Peace. The unexpected kind. An hour passed, perhaps two. Time blurred. The window brightened. The garden shook off its gray. It's beautiful, isn't it? She said at last, following his glance. He nodded. My mother designed it. She chose every flower. She had fine taste. A beet. I'm sorry. For your loss. Her compassion sounded real, not the polished condolence obliged by etiquette. Nathaniel swallowed. It was long ago. 8 years. Grief isn't measured by years. Simple words. True ones. He found himself looking at her, looking this time with a clarity that unsettled him. Whoever she was not the Cecilia he had been prepared for. Not spoiled, not vain, not foolish. Something else entirely. He could not name it. He only knew he did not dislike it. The clock chimed 8. She rose, smoothing the nightgown with careful hands. I should go. Mary will bring breakfast and I would not cause trouble. He stood too, a reflex he didn't question. You do not. She offered him a small, sad smile and went to the door. With her hand on the latch, she paused. My lord? Yes? Thank you. For this. For not sending me away, his brow knit. Why would I? She didn't answer. She slipped out with the book, and he was left alone, an odd awareness settling over him. Something had happened. Small as a shift of light, but real. He had come for a ledger and found a person. More particularly a wife, who was not what he had expected, who did not behave as she should, who apparently feared him almost as much as he, if he were honest, feared. What, knowing her? Caring? Nathaniel did not know. At the window, a scatter of rose petals lay on the lawn. Pale. Chapter 5. The Bond and the Fear. Amelia had not returned to the library since that morning. 3 days had passed, and she had remained inside her rooms, pretending the encounter had never happened. Pretending she didn't think about it. Pretending the quiet peace they'd shared hadn't meant anything. But it had, and that terrified her, because the longer she stayed in Harrowgate, the harder it became to remember what was real. That she was not Cecilia. That this marriage was a lie built upon deceit. And that Nathaniel did not truly know her. He knew only the shadow she cast, the mask she wore. If he ever learned the truth, if he discovered who she really was, a poor cousin, an impostor, a liar, he would despise her. Perhaps even expose her. Certainly send her away, and Amelia had nowhere to go. She never had. Mary brought breakfast as usual, but this time with a message. His lordship asked if you'd like to walk in the gardens this afternoon, milady. He said the weather's pleasant. Amelia nearly dropped her teacup. Nathaniel had asked about her? Invited her somewhere? For days he had gone back to his old pattern, distant, silent, deliberately absent. She had convinced herself the moment in the library was an aberration, a mistake he'd since corrected by avoiding her. But now, when? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. At 3 o'clock, milady. If you wish, of course. Mary smiled, pleased. No doubt the servants whispered about the strange marriage, the Viscountess who never left her room, the lord who kept to himself. A walk together would feed talk of normalcy. Amelia nodded slowly. Tell him. I accept, because refusing would seem suspicious, and because, God help her, she wanted to go. She was tired of walls, tired of silence, tired of being no one. At exactly 3, Amelia descended the grand staircase wearing a pale blue muslin gown, one of Lady Margaret's gifts, though simpler than the others. A straw bonnet with a matching ribbon framed her face. Her heart raced so violently she could hear it. This would be the first time he truly saw her. In daylight, unveiled. Nathaniel waited in the entrance hall, dressed informally in a brown waistcoat and wool coat. When he looked up and saw her descending, he stopped. For a moment he simply looked, and under that gray, steady gaze her cheeks burned. Then he blinked as though waking, and inclined his head politely. Lady Devereux, thank you for accepting my invitation, the formality stung. Lady Devereux? Not her name. Never her name. The pleasure is mine, my lord, she said softly, reaching the last step. He offered his arm. She hesitated only a second before placing her hand upon it. Even through fabric, her glove, his sleeve, she felt the warmth. Solid. Real. And something inside her trembled. They stepped into the gardens, the autumn sun turning everything to gold. The air smelled of damp earth and fallen leaves, beautiful, melancholy, like everything in Harrogate. Amelia kept her gaze lowered, aware of his occasional glances. Not judging, curious, almost gentle. And that frightened her more than hostility ever could, because the more he saw her, the closer he came to seeing too much. They walked the stone paths bordered by late-blooming roses. Nathaniel stopped beside a climbing vine heavy with white flowers. My mother planted these, he said. It took years before they bloomed properly. She used to say the most beautiful things require patience. Amelia looked at the blossoms. Perfect, delicate, fragile. She was wise, she murmured. Nathaniel turned to her, sunlight soft across his features. I wish she could have met you. You would have had much in common. Something in his voice made Amelia look up. There was sadness there, quiet and deep. Before she could stop herself, she asked, Do you miss her? Every day, he said at once. Then hesitated. Forgive me. I shouldn't speak of— Don't, Amelia interrupted gently. Don't apologize. Loss doesn't follow calendars. He studied her for a long moment. You've lost someone too, he said, not as a question, but as a certainty. Her heart stumbled. Careful, Amelia. She began, but bit off the word parents just in time. Nathaniel frowned slightly. Waiting. My nurse, she said quickly. The woman who raised me. She was more than a servant. She was family. It wasn't a complete lie, but not the truth either. He regarded her quietly. For a dreadful second she thought he'd press further, ask why she hesitated, why her voice trembled. But he only nodded. I'm sorry. Those losses never really leave us. Yes, she whispered. They don't. Relief and shame tangled in her chest. They walked again, slower now. The silence between them had changed. Not empty, but weighted with something unnamed. Nathaniel seemed thoughtful. Amelia, nauseated with guilt, she had almost told him everything. Almost destroyed the lie with 3 careless words. She had to be careful. Always careful. Why did you marry me? She asked suddenly, desperate to redirect the moment. Nathaniel stopped, turned fully to face her. For duty, he said. My father arranged it before his death. It mattered to him. To the family. He paused. And you? Why did you agree? Her throat closed. Because it wasn't me. Because I'm living another woman's life. Because everything you see is false. For duty as well, she said finally, voice steady by sheer will. Sometimes we have no choice. Nathaniel nodded slowly, but his eyes lingered a heartbeat longer, as though searching for something beneath her calm. No, he said softly. Sometimes we don't. They reached a stone overlook where the hills rolled endlessly into gold and green. A bench stood waiting. They sat, a polite distance apart, yet Amelia could feel him. The warmth of his body, the quiet scent of leather and cedar, the weight of his presence beside her. He stared at the horizon, then asked, hesitating, "May I ask why you tried to hide your face that morning in the library?" Amelia's pulse spiked because I wasn't who you expected. Because I was terrified you'd see it. Insecurity, she said finally. Half-truths were easier than lies. I grew up unnoticed, he frowned. Unnoticed? Some people spend their lives in the shadows of others, she explained, voice barely above a whisper. I was one of them. He looked at her for a long time, then said quietly, "You're not invisible to me." The words were simple, but they struck her like a storm. I'm not invisible to him, but who did he see? Cecilia, the woman he thought he'd married, or Amelia, the woman she truly was? They stayed until the sun sank low, painting the sky in rose and amber. They talked of safe things, the land, the tenants, the harvest, books, and how reading had always been her refuge. At some point, the distance between them shrank. Not much, just enough. When he leaned forward to point at something in the distance, his shoulder brushed hers. His hand rested near hers on the stone bench, so close she could feel its warmth. It would be so easy to move her fingers. To touch him, too easy. Too wrong. They returned to the house under a sky dusted with the first stars. At the door, Nathaniel turned to her, and for the first time, smiled. Small. Cautious. Real. Thank you. For today, it was pleasant. Something warm flickered in her chest. Dangerous. Sweet. Impossible. For me as well, she whispered. He hesitated, as if wanting to say more to step closer, but only inclined his head and climbed the stairs. Amelia remained in the hall, her heart wild and aching. This cannot happen. I cannot care. I cannot feel, but it was already too late, because something inside her had begun to bloom. Fragile, impossible, doomed from the start. Then Mary appeared, carrying an ivory envelope sealed with red wax. A letter, milady. From London, and Amelia's world crumbled again. She ran upstairs, shut the door, and tore the seal with trembling hands. Lady Margaret's handwriting spilled across the page, hurried and sharp. Dearest Cecilia, I trust you've kept discreet. Cecilia has not been found. Rumors are spreading in London. Be exceedingly cautious and raise no suspicion. Remember what's at stake. Your aunt. Amelia read it 3 times, then crumpled it and threw it into the fire, watching it burn. Raise no suspicion. Too late. Because she had almost told him everything. And worse, she had begun to feel something she should not. Something that would destroy her when truth came to light. She pressed her back against the door and slid down to the floor, arms around her knees. Outside, the night folded over Harrowgate like a shroud, and Amelia, poor, false, foolish Amelia, wept for the first time in days because she could not have this. Not him, not love, and the longer it lasted, the more it would hurt when she lost it. Chapter 6. The Breaking Point. Nathaniel could not stop thinking about her. 3 days since the walk in the garden, and he found himself glancing at the library door each morning, waiting for her to appear. He tried to work his ledgers, but the numbers blurred. He rode the boundaries of his land, but his mind wandered. He dined alone in his study, and the quiet weighed heavier than before. Something had shifted. Or perhaps he had. For the first time in 3 years, since he had taken on every responsibility, after his father's death, Nathaniel felt a little less alone. And that frightened him. Letting anyone in meant danger. It meant soft places. It meant that when, not if, that person left or failed him, the pain would be real. And Nathaniel Devereaux could not afford pain. Not with lives depending on his decisions. Not with a name to uphold, accounts to steady, a legacy to keep intact. So why could he not forget her? It was 6 o'clock when he went down to the library, determined to reclaim his discipline. Letters from solicitors waited for replies. Stewards' reports required decisions. Work, this was the ground that held. He opened the desk drawer, reaching for the marriage agreement. Some clauses on inheritance needed reviewing, and his hand struck something small and hard at the back. A navy velvet box, dust soft along its edges. He frowned. He did not remember placing it there. He opened it. Nestled in sun-faded satin lay a miniature on ivory, rimmed in delicate gold. A young girl's portrait. He lifted it toward the lamplight, and memory rose at once. His father had given him this years ago when the Westfield match had first been arranged. "Your bride," his father had said, pleased. "Pretty, isn't she?" Nathaniel studied the painting. The girl was young, 15, perhaps 16. Pale gold curls tumbled over her shoulders. Clear blue eyes looked straight out from the frame. An aristocratic length to the face, a height implied even in the seated pose. Beautiful, in a classical, faintly chilly way, and entirely, utterly, unlike the woman he had married. Cold slipped beneath his ribs. He compared without wanting to. His wife's hair was brown. Her eyes, dark, almost amber at the light's edge. Her features, small, fine, breakable. Her stature, slight. She barely reached his shoulder. None of it matched. Not one thing. The miniature clicked against the desk as he set it down. His hands were not steady. He breathed, slow, deliberate. Think. There might be an explanation. Time changed people, yes, but not like this. Fair hair did not deepen to that shade of brown. Blue eyes did not turn dark. Bones did not rearrange themselves into other faces, unless the person in the portrait and the person at his altar had never been the same. He turned the ivory over. A neat hand on the back. Lady C. Westfield, 1843. 5 years ago. 16 then, 21 now. The age his bride would be. But the two faces did not resolve. He rose too quickly. The chair skidded back. Rain had begun, thin and persistent, stippling the library window. In his mind, the pieces began to settle where he had refused to set them before. The faint note of simple lavender on her skin when she could surely afford finer scents. The way she moved through his house as if comfort were new to her. The small, careful pauses whenever loss or family slipped into conversation. The constant, silent watchfulness. And now, this. Who are you? The question arrived whole. Who are you really? Two possibilities. The wrong miniature had been sent, unlikely, given the inscription, or the woman he had married was not Cecilia Westfield. He felt something odd in his chest. Not anger, something nearer to disquiet, and, more dangerously, interest. If she was not Cecilia, who was she? Why step into another woman's vows? Was she forced, threatened, hiding from something worse? Or had she chosen? He thought of her in the garden. The careful honesty, the way she listened, the way she reached for words and then tucked them back, the gentleness with servants, the open, unguarded love of books. None of it smacked of calculation. All of it smelled of fear. And another truth. Quietly unforgiving. He had gone to that church ready to keep a promise, not to meet a person. He had married a veil and a contract. If he had not cared, then who stood beneath it? Why was he so ready to condemn now? He spent the remainder of the day searching without noise. In his father's old files, he found a letter from Lady Margaret. 2 years prior. Cecilia is learning the pianoforte and embroidery, though she would rather read. The pianoforte caught him. He rang for the butler. Has Lady Devereux ever mentioned playing? A hesitation. No, my lord. In fact, passing the music room 2 days ago, I heard her tell Mary it was a pity she could not play any instrument at all. Another piece. Another seam split. The question was no longer if she was an impostor, but why, and who she was when she set fear down. Night pressed close. Rain hardened. Nathaniel shut himself in the study with a decanter he did not uncork. He sat in the low light and let the miniature catch the fire's flicker. The painted Cecilia stared back, lovely, distant, unknown. And then he saw the other face in his mind. Brown-haired, delicate, afraid, and somehow growing less afraid in his presence. He did not feel fury. He felt thwarted by the edges he could not read. He felt shut out. Above all, he felt an inexorable pull toward the missing chapter between the two faces. There was a story here, a reason, and he needed to hear it, not to punish, but to understand. Because the woman he had met these past days did not seem capable of malice. She seemed capable of breaking under a weight she had been made to carry. Footsteps in the corridor. Light. Hesitant. Her. He would know that tread now in a crowd. A shadow paused across the crack beneath the door. He heard her breath, held, then trembling. A lifted hand. A faint shift in the light, as if to knock. And then a retreat. Waiting. Then leaving. Her steps drifting back up the stairs. Nathaniel remained still. Part of him wanted to open the door, let the question fall between them and survive whatever came of it. Another part, cooler, older, held back. Not out of fear, because a blunt confrontation might send her running before the whole truth could surface. If she was in danger, if she had been pushed into this, he would need more than guesswork to shield her. He had always made his decisions with facts in hand. That would not change now. He sat and wrote to his solicitor in London, who had witnessed the ceremony. The reply, marked urgent, would come in 3 or 4 days. Then he would have confirmation, whether the true Cecilia matched the miniature, and therefore proof that his wife was not who she claimed to be. Yet even as he sealed the letter, another, quieter realization took him off guard. The name had begun to matter less than he expected. The bargain had been his father's, not his. He had kept it because a dying man had asked him to. He had stood at the altar and spoken the words. If the woman beneath the veil had not been Cecilia, then yes, he had been deceived. But whatever had unfolded since, the hush of a library, the soft gold of a garden, had not been false. Those moments were real, because she had been real in them. He doused the lamps and carried the miniature upstairs, setting it on the dressing table by the window. As he undressed, he found himself holding both faces in his mind. The painted one, perfect, cold, unearned, and the living one, imperfect, warm, already threading itself into familiarity. Who are you, he thought, lying back in the dark, and what happened that made you step into someone else's life? These were not questions edged with rage. They were edged with something far more dangerous for a man who relied on iron and distance, genuine concern. Nathaniel Devereux, who had survived 3 unforgiving years by refusing to want anything he could not control, understood with unwelcome clarity that he had started to care. Not for Lady Cecilia Westfield, for the brown-eyed stranger sleeping at the far end of the corridor. And that changed everything. Chapter 7. The Choice and the Flight. 3 days. 3 long, hollow days since Nathaniel had withdrawn again. Amelia felt the distance like a candle being snuffed out. A small flame that had barely begun to warm her world, now gone. He no longer joined her for breakfast in the library. No more walks, no polite invitations. When they happened to cross paths in the corridors, rarely, for he seemed to plan their movements like military routes. He would simply incline his head, courteous, detached, and move on, as if nothing had happened, as if the garden had never existed, as if the shared silence, the almost smile, the spark of something tender, had all been nothing, and Amelia did not understand. What had changed? What had she done wrong? But in the deep, fearful corner of her heart, the one that always expected the worst, she knew. He had begun to suspect. Something had betrayed her. A word misplaced. A habit wrong, a story that did not fit. And now he was watching her from afar, gathering evidence, building his case. The distance was not indifference. It was investigation. By the fourth night, Amelia could no longer bear it. The waiting was worse than any truth. Living suspended, knowing the fall was coming, it was slow torture. She had to act. She had to confess before he accused. To make him see it had not been malice, only desperation. Perhaps, just perhaps, if she told him first, he would understand. At 10 o'clock, when the mansion had quieted and only the wind groaned through the windows, Amelia left her room. Barefoot, wrapped in her shawl, she crept down the staircase toward the study. Light glowed beneath the door. He was awake, always working, as if sleep meant surrendering to something he could not control. She stopped before the door. Her pulse beat in her throat. She raised her hand, knocked once, twice. Silence. Then she turned the handle. The room was empty. She frowned. Perhaps he was in his chambers. She turned toward the corridor and saw it, a faint line of light under his bedroom door. His room faced hers across the long corridor, separated by Persian carpet and heavy quiet. She walked slowly, heart hammering. Approaching that door felt like crossing forbidden ground, private, masculine, sacred in its solitude. No wife entered without permission, but she had no choice. She needed to speak before courage fled. She stopped. Knocked softly, my lord. No answer. Amelia pushed the door open. The room was large, all dark wood and order, masculine, deliberate, everything in its place. The bed was untouched, the candle still burning on the table beside it. And there, beside the candle, something glinted, a small gold-framed miniature. Her stomach twisted. She stepped closer, almost against her will, and lifted it into the light. The world tilted. A young woman gazed up from the ivory, golden curls arranged in delicate coils, blue eyes bright as summer sky, a long, aristocratic face. Beneath, in fine script, Lady C. Westfield, 1843, Cecilia, the true Cecilia, the cousin who had fled into the night, leaving Amelia to wear her name, her dress, her fate. And Nathaniel had her portrait. He had the real face of the woman he was meant to marry. He had compared them. He had seen. He knew. Panic came cold and fast. The miniature slipped from her hands onto the table with a dull sound. Her fingers shook so violently she could hardly breathe. He knows. God, he knows. That was why he had grown silent. Why he watched from a distance. He was collecting proof, preparing to expose her, to have her dragged from his house like a fraud. The thoughts came wild, unstoppable. Prison, scandal, ruin. The Westfields disgraced. Her name in newspapers as liar, deceiver, impostor. Nathaniel's disgust. His contempt. She would lose everything. The fragile safety she'd built. The roof. The food. The illusion of belonging. She would be cast out without reference, without money, without a single place left in the world, back to being no one, or worse, someone marked forever by the word criminal. Amelia stumbled backward, nearly tripping over her shawl. She fled the room, shut the door too quickly. Her breath came ragged as she ran through the corridor, back up the stairs. She needed to think. To plan, but there was no time. Nathaniel would return. He would confront her. And she could not face him. Not when he had evidence. Not when every detail screamed guilty. Run! The word came clear and merciless. Run before it's too late. Before they lock you away, before they destroy you, she did not question it. Did not weigh options, instinct, the same raw, desperate instinct that had saved her at 12 when she'd lost everything, took over. When the world collapses, you run. She changed into her plainest dress, brown muslin, simple, forgettable. Threw her shawl around her shoulders. No jewels, they weren't hers. No money, she had none. She opened the door, checked the corridor. Silence. The house slept. Nathaniel was still gone. Now. It had to be now. She descended the staircase, crossed the hall, and opened the front door as quietly as she could and stepped into the night. The air cut like glass. Wind whipped through the trees, carrying the promise of a storm. Clouds swallowed the moon. The world turned to shadows. Amelia went down the steps, along the oak-lined drive toward the gates. She didn't know where she was going. She had no plan, only one word that pulsed with every heartbeat. Away. Far away. Perhaps she'd find a village, a kind family in need of a governess or maid. Perhaps nothing. None of it mattered. Fear pushed her forward, one trembling step at a time along the cold gravel path. She reached the gate. It was unlocked. Thank God. Then she was on the road to London, 3 hours by carriage. How long on foot? 6, 8? She didn't care. She would walk. She would walk until her legs gave out. Anything was better than staying. Anything was better than seeing the disgust in his eyes when he called her a liar. A thief? Nothing. Rain began. Slow, heavy drops that darkened her shawl and clung to her skin. She pulled the fabric over her head and kept moving. The road was black, flanked by endless stone fences and soaked fields. No lamps, no houses. Only darkness and the relentless drumming of rain. Her bare feet, she'd forgotten shoes in her panic, tore against stones and mud. Still, she walked. Because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant realizing the truth. She was doing exactly what Cecilia had done. Running, leaving wreckage behind. But Cecilia had run toward something. A man she loved. A dream she chose. Amelia was running from everything. From her lie. From his eyes. From herself. Thunder rolled across the hills. A flash of lightning tore the sky open. For an instant she saw it all. Flooded fields. Bent trees, the endless empty road ahead. And in that brief, merciless light, she understood something terrible. She no longer knew who she was. She was not Cecilia. She had never been, but she was not Amelia anymore either. Not the obedient girl who stayed silent, who accepted her fate, who knew her place. That Amelia would have remained. That Amelia would have tried to explain, to plead, to hope. This one, drenched, shaking, alone in the storm, didn't know herself at all. She only knew she could not go back. Her knees gave way. She stumbled, fell into the mud. The cold bit deep into her bones. She tried to rise, but her legs quivered under her. How long had she been walking? An hour, 2? She couldn't tell. Time no longer existed. Only rain, only dark, only exhaustion. Get up, keep going. But she couldn't. Not anymore. She staggered toward the outline of a small, abandoned cottage by the roadside. The door hung crooked, the roof sagged, but it was shelter. She pushed inside, fell to the floor, and curled in on herself. Hugging her knees tight, outside the storm raged. Inside, she shook and whispered the only words left to her. I'm sorry. Sorry for the lie. Sorry for the hope. Sorry for ever believing she could step into another life and not lose herself completely. And as thunder rolled across the moors, Amelia Westfield, whoever she still was, cried for everything she could never make right. Chapter 8. Redemption and Light. Nathaniel returned to the stables after midnight. He had spent hours riding across the darkened lands beneath a swollen sky, trying to quiet his thoughts. That morning, the letter from London had arrived. Confirmation from the Genealogical Society itself. Lady Cecilia Westfield, daughter of Lord Harold Westfield, blonde hair, blue eyes, tall stature, birthmark on her left wrist. Every line had confirmed what he already knew. The woman he had married was not Cecilia. Yet strangely, the truth brought no fury. Only clarity. He needed to speak with her, to hear everything, to understand the why. And then only then decide, not as a man bound by contracts, but as one who finally understood that he cared more for the woman herself than for any name she bore. That changed everything. As he handed his horse to the sleepy stable boy, Nathaniel made his decision. At dawn, he would confront her, not with accusations, but with questions, and at last, he would know. He entered the manor through the side door, shaking the rain from his coat. The storm had just begun. Fine rain yet, but the wind outside promised more. He climbed the stairs quietly, paused at his door, and then looked across the corridor. Her room. Dark. Silent. She was asleep. Perhaps, exhausted by the same silence that had gnawed at him these past days. Nathaniel felt a tightness in his chest. Guilt, maybe, because he'd seen it, the terror in her eyes whenever they passed each other. She had known he suspected. She had lived in that fear. Tomorrow, he promised silently. Tomorrow this ends. For both of us. He entered his room, closed the door. He did not notice hers was slightly ajar. He did not hear the faint footsteps later that night. He noticed only his exhaustion as he removed his boots and surrendered to uneasy sleep. He woke to pounding on the door. Nathaniel! Groggy, he sat up. Pale dawn seeped through the curtains. "My lord, please." The butler's voice sharp with panic. Nathaniel opened the door. The man stood there, robe thrown over his nightclothes, face drained of color. "What is it?" "It's Lady Devereux, sir. Mary went to take her breakfast and—" he swallowed. "The room's empty. The bed wasn't slept in. She's gone." For a moment, the words made no sense. "Gone? Have you searched the house?" "Yes, my lord. She isn't in the library, the conservatory, or the garden. No one has seen her since last night." Then the realization hit. Cold, sharp, merciless. Nathaniel pushed past him, ran down the corridor, and flung open her door. Untouched bed. Wardrobe ajar, one plain dress missing, a shawl gone, no jewels, no bag. It looked as though she had stepped out for air, except no one walked out into a storm at 5 a.m. "She's run away," he said, voice raw. "My lord, perhaps she ran." He turned, stormed back toward his room, and stopped short. The miniature. It was no longer inside its box. It had been moved, touched. His eyes closed as the truth hit like a blow to the ribs. She came here. She saw it. She knows I know. God, she thought I meant to expose her, and so she fled. Alone. Unprotected. "Have my horse saddled," he ordered, pulling on his boots again. "My lord, the weather, now!" The household erupted into motion. Nathaniel thundered down the stairs, heart racing with calculation and dread. She had no money. No carriage. She would go on foot. To London, perhaps. 3 hours by horse, 6 or more walking, and she had been gone for what? 4 hours? 5? She would be soaked. Exhausted. Terrified. The stable hand brought his horse, eyes wide with worry. "If I'm not back by noon, send riders along the London road." And with that, Nathaniel was gone, plunging into the rain. The storm had matured to violence. Wind howled sideways. Sheets of rain blurred the world into gray. He leaned low over the saddle, arm raised against the sting, calling her name, though thunder devoured every sound. "Millie! Amelia!" He rode mile after mile through mud and water, driven by something deeper than duty. He wasn't searching to confront, not to punish, not even to understand. He was searching because the thought of losing her felt unbearable. He almost missed it. A dark shape near the doorway of an abandoned cottage. Motionless. Nathaniel yanked the reins, the horse rearing and snorting. He was off before it fully stopped, boots sinking into mud as he ran, and there she was, collapsed by the door, drenched, trembling violently, bare feet cut and bleeding. "Cecilia," he cried, falling to his knees beside her, hands finding her face. Her eyes fluttered open, those warm, haunted brown eyes that had undone him from the beginning. When she recognized him, she flinched. "No. Please, I'll go. I swear I'll go. Just don't stop me." Her voice was broken, trembling with cold and fear. Nathaniel felt something tear open inside him. "Go? You'd have died out here. Better that than be arrested. Better that than, I'm not going to arrest you." The words burst out louder than intended, echoing off the stone. She froze, staring, confusion mixing with fear. He steadied his breath, softened his tone. "I'm not going to arrest you," he repeated. "Or expose you, or... God, do you think I rode through a storm to hand you over?" Rain streaked down her cheeks, or were they tears? He couldn't tell. You know, she whispered. "The miniature. You have her portrait. You know I'm not Cecilia." "I know," he said quietly. "I've known for days. And I should be angry. I should feel deceived. But strangely..." He hesitated, searching for words he had never spoken before. "I only want to know your real name. I want to understand. I'm nobody," she sobbed. The poor cousin. The one who never mattered. The one who took her place because Cecilia ran and someone had to save the family's honor. "I'm Amelia Westfield, and I'm so sorry." Nathaniel listened, and then did the only thing that made sense. He drew her into his arms, wet, shaking, alive, wrapping her inside his coat, shielding her from the wind. "You're not nobody," he murmured against her hair. "You're Amelia Westfield, and I would very much like to know you, if you'll let me." She trembled, not from cold, but from something deeper. Relief, maybe. The release of a burden too long carried alone. "Why?" she whispered. "Why don't you hate me?" He pulled back enough to see her face. Lightning lit her eyes, all fear, hope, and the barest spark of courage. "Because these last days," he said slowly, each word deliberate, "I met someone. Someone who loves books, who treats servants with kindness, who understands loneliness, and that person, I can't bear to lose. Whatever her name," thunder rumbled. But between them, beneath the broken roof and the weight of rain, something fragile burned warm, a light no storm could put out. Nathaniel rose, helping her to her feet. "Come," he said. "Let's go home. You'll tell me everything, from the beginning, with no more lies." Amelia nodded, still trembling, but with something new in her eyes. Trust. Thin as glass, but real, he lifted her into the saddle, mounted behind, his arms steady around her as they turned toward Harrogate. And as they rode through the last waves of the storm, the first rays of dawn broke through the clouds, pale gold spilling across the wet fields, lighting the road home. Chepelogue. 2 weeks later. 2 weeks later, Amelia held a letter that had arrived from London that morning. It wasn't from Lady Margaret, it was from Cecilia. The first since the night she vanished. "Dearest Amelia, I know I have no right to ask forgiveness. But you must know, I knew Mother would force you to take my place. And as terrible as it sounds, I thought I was giving you a gift. I looked into Viscount Devereux before I ran. Everyone said the same thing. He is a good man, a just man, a wealthy man. Nothing like the libertines paraded before me in ballrooms. I thought you deserved someone like that. Someone who would treat you well. Who would give you safety? I fled for love. But perhaps I pushed you toward something better than love, toward respect, toward peace. I hope I wasn't wrong. I hope you can forgive me someday. Your cousin, Cecilia." Amelia folded the letter slowly. She didn't know if she forgave. She didn't know if she ever would, not entirely. But she understood. Cecilia had run after her heart, and without meaning to, given Amelia what she'd never had, a choice. Because now, with the truth laid bare, Nathaniel had offered exactly that. Will you stay? Not as Cecilia. As Amelia, as my true wife. Not by contract, but by choice. And Amelia had chosen to stay. She looked out the window of the very room where she had woken lost weeks ago. Only now she did not feel lost. She felt found. On the desk lay the other letter, the one Nathaniel had received from his solicitor 3 days prior and left for her to read. My lord, regarding the matter of the exchanged bride, in law, the contract was violated by the Westfield family. You are entitled to annul the marriage and demand compensation. However, should you prefer to uphold the union, we may simply omit any mention of the irregularity. The choice is yours. And Nathaniel had chosen not to mention it. Not because he was trapped. Because, as he'd said with that almost smile, I never cared for the bride on paper, but the woman I found, I do not wish to lose her. Warmth rose in Amelia's chest. He could have sent her away within his rights. He could have pursued the Westfields. Instead, he chose to stay. He chose her. Outside, Nathaniel crossed the garden with a book in hand, the very Austen volume she'd left in the library. He was coming to fetch her so they could read together, as they did every morning now. Not as lord and lady playing parts. As Nathaniel and Amelia, two people learning one another in truth. No masks, no lies, only truth, fragile and precious as a flower opening after a storm. And Amelia smiled, small but real. For the first time in 12 years, since she lost her parents, she felt she belonged. Not because she filled someone else's place, because someone had chosen to see her, chosen to know her, chosen to stay, even when the law offered an escape. He paused by the white rosebush his mother had planted years before. A blossom had fallen during last week's storm. He'd seen it on the lawn, pale and bruised. Yet instead of withering, the bush had put out new growth. Stronger, lovelier, as if it needed to break to learn how to bloom differently. Nathaniel smiled. He understood now. Some things must fracture before they can be whole. Some marriages begin in falsehood to arrive at the truth. And some people enter our lives under the wrong name only to become exactly who we needed. His solicitor had been baffled. My lord, you don't wish to address the Westfields' deception? Nathaniel declined, because it wasn't a loss if he'd found more than promised. It wasn't fraud if the outcome was grace. Inside the manor, Amelia descended the stairs. Nathaniel entered from the garden. They met in the hall, the very place they had first stood as man and wife, when she hid behind a white veil and he did not dare look. But now they looked, truly looked, and in the space between them, where silence and fear had once lived, something new had taken root, promise. Not of perfection, not a fairy tale, a promise of truth built on the ruins of lies, of love born not from a sudden blaze but from daily choosing, of two solitary souls who found in each other, not salvation, but company. And sometimes company is everything. Nathaniel held out his hand. Amelia took it, not as obligation, but as a vow freely given. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, and Amelia no longer feared the light. She felt only gratitude for finally being seen.